In the quiet moments before the world wakes up, there's a place where pain meets peace, where every breath feels like a prayer and grief stands still. We carry the weight of what was and search for meaning in the smallest things. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to remind us we're still here, still healing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grief Let's Talk About a Podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I'm the host of this podcast, and yes, we are your number one podcast for bringing you stories around death, dying, and grief, all the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And most importantly, this is a live stream. So if you have any questions for either myself or my guests, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. One other thing, and this is it, I promise, this is for educational purposes only. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest, Sweta. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad to be here having this conversation about something that's not talked about enough.
This is very true. This is very true. And welcome to the show. This is exciting.
Thank you. I am very excited to be here and I love the work that you do. So just looking forward to where this hour takes us.
Yes. I'm, a lot of other people are starting to tune in as well. So before we get started, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Okay. So hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you for tuning in, for listening, and being a part of this community because together we heal better. My name is Sweta Vikram. I am an Ayurvedic doctor, a trauma-informed yoga teacher, a certified grief coach, author of 14 books, a health speaker, an adjunct professor, and just like a student of life, a perpetual student of life, if you would say. And what I do help people do is lower their stress, anxiety, and help with their gut health issues, all using holistic wellness methods, which is Ayurveda, yoga. And the reason I mention this is because grief is a form of trauma and oftentimes can lead to several physical, emotional, and mental health issues.
I definitely agree with that. And so let's talk more in depth about how you help individuals do the work that you do.
Absolutely. So I'll focus on Ayurvedic coaching. So there are three ways. Firstly, I write a book, articles for magazines. Then I also do one-on-one Ayurvedic coaching, which I'll get into. And the third is speaking. I teach workshops or I'll speak at companies, at colleges, at high schools, at organizations, at entrepreneurial spaces on specific topics. So I have one talk coming up in September, and it's all about how to navigate sleep and insomnia using Ayurvedic methods. So Ayurveda, Tony, is a customized way of healing, right? We look at diet, we look at lifestyle, some Ayurvedic herbs, and all the modalities or the recommendations, the recommendations are completely customized. But so that would be the one-on-one coaching where, people sign up for 3 months or 6 months, and we have a lot of fun. You've spoken with me. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of sass because, the healing work is so intense. Our time together need not be in my sessions.
Yes.
And when organizations hire me or colleges, we, again, pick a specific topic depending on what they need. So sometimes it has been, how AI might be impacting mental health or neurodiversity, right? Or it has been, what about anxiety? What about gut health? If people think, oh, what about gut? What we eat impacts how we think impacts what food choices we make. So it's really approaching health from a wholesome angle because I love food, I love life, and I don't like a life of deprivation. So, creating this beautiful life without excessive boundaries, creating these health rituals without excessive boundaries. And the other thing that I do is grief coaching. So this book I wrote, The Loss That Binds Us, it has 108 tips. And this is to navigate grief. And this is who I am. I like information, but in bite sized pieces. The last thing you need, whether you're in a health coaching session, in a grief coaching session, attending my workshop, is chunks of information. They're like, now what do I do? See, my body language changed and I'm stressed. So, how can we demystify health information out there? But how can we make information accessible, affordable, and easily digestible by people? And in Ayurveda, which is a 5,000-year-old ancient healing system from India, it's the oldest medical system. We talk about the power of digestion, digestive fire, Agni. So it's not just the foods that we eat, also the information in the world. Like, simple tip, people watching the news and eating dinner, what are we doing? Or what happens when we do this? We go into a sympathetic nervous system, which is telling the body, oh, it's danger, danger. So it's creating these simple rituals of how can we thrive by using what we have around us. And Ayurveda is really empowering. It honors the seasons, it honors the cycles, it honors the circadian rhythm. But more importantly, it honors you, where you come from, what did you grow up with, what's your comfort food. Something that your grandma probably, cooked might sit better with you than it would sit with someone who never ate that growing up, right? So it's also because we go through these health fads and trends, like everybody should be eating kale, everybody should be eating so and so, we eating mangoes in the month of December. It's not natural, it's not seasonal. So seriously, something has been put into this for people to be eating mangoes in December. It's not natural. So really empowering people is what I do, reminding them, if we listen to nature, if we paid more attention to who we are, health can be on our side.
I love that. I love that. And coming from a place of a former personal trainer,
Mm.
everything that you said about, taking care of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is part of the four basic pillars that I use when I work in my groups with these men and everything. And what I realized is that it's universal across the board, right? It's the approach that you have with it. And I'm really, really big on approach. I'm really big on education, on how to approach certain situations when I'm with certain individuals, right? Because not everybody, you can't approach everybody the same way. Everybody has, because you don't know where their triggers and stuff are. So you got to take the time to get to know them. So let's talk about your journey a little bit. How did you get into this field? What was your journey like leading up into this?
Sure. So, I started with sports nutrition. I got a postgraduate in sports nutrition. And while I was working with athletes during my internship, I realized, how do we not have customized diet plans? If
Mhm.
someone grew up in Georgia versus someone who grew up in Washington, D.C. versus someone who grew up in Montana, how are they eating the same? Why is the same diet plan a remedy for all of them? Like, you have to honor physically where they come from, the geography of the location, the soil, every bit, right? And a cold climate versus warm climate. Um, how we not honoring that? And so I started to find answers in Ayurveda. Now, mind you, growing up in an Indian Hindu home, I'd heard of Ayurveda, right? It's not religious, it's science. So there were tips that were being introduced into the family. They're like, oh, your body is aching, turmeric latte works. Things like, so I grew up with that, but human tendency is to dismiss what you grow up with. Where is the wisdom in it, right?
Yes.
So I was being rebellious, but I think I was seeking those answers. In it doesn't make sense to me we telling everybody to do the same thing when we are all individuals and our body might require something different, or even the mind. Not everyone
Yes.
can sit and meditate. So to tell people, go sit quietly in a corner for 30 minutes, now close your eyes and focus, it can be triggering for a lot of people, especially trauma survivors, right? So I found Ayurveda very customized for individual healing. And I'm also a yoga teacher. My initial training was in Vinyasa yoga, but I'm also Ayur yoga teacher, which means using Ayurvedic principles. As in, why does one person really love hot yoga and the other person falls sick? So I've always been a seeker. So finding answers to these questions, I was finding them through Ayurveda. And I think the main tipping point was when I was like, yep, this is going to be it for me, was when my mom passed away suddenly. And even though Western science told us, oh, this is what happened, she was headed to a vacation with my dad. How do you go from dinner with the extended family laughing to I don't feel well to the ER and then dead?
Yeah.
But I found those answers in Ayurveda. And I was like, you know what? I couldn't help my mom, but let me see if I can help others. I love Western medicine. It's so great for so many things. But I think if people would be more empowered if they connected with themselves, like, did my mom know some other signs and symptoms that she had not paid attention to? But also, how does someone just go like this? There are all, and Ayurveda will tell you there's 6 stages to a disease. So I think that's what the final thing was for me. I've studied with incredible teachers, I've done internships in hospitals, done trainings, worked in different labs, and I think it just made me surer of, if we can prevent people from falling sick, imagine how great a healthcare system would be and how good it would be for each one of us. Like, yes, I am grateful that we live in a world where there is help available, but what if we could sort of mitigate 50% of that? What if we knew what we eat doesn't work for us and we didn't eat that? What if we knew not everyone needs to do the Ironman? Like, maybe 20 minutes of walking is the best for you. And I'm just giving this random example. So it's, again, I think that's what got me in this. Like, I've always been a seeker. I've always wanted to know. And I was finding these answers in Ayurveda, where what is nectar for one could be poison for the other. And I think that has become my guiding principle. Like, kale might be great for one person, but it might give kidney stones to another person. And I found the answers in Ayurveda why that was happening. So it was asking these questions, then having these answers, finding these answers, and being able to help my clients.
I love that. I love the depthness of it, because it gives a different perspective of how to look at those things, right? And you're
Right,
absolutely right. We're all our own individual selves. So it's just like, I'm gonna use a prime example. It's just like grieving.
right.
What works for one person is not going to work for another person,
Agreed.
right? Because and the reason why I say that is I'm going to use myself as an example. I found the answers in solitude. Whereas if someone is grieving, we encourage them to go and find a community, right? Like, I function better in solitude because there was no outside influence or distractions to keep me from diving deeper into what it meant to grieve and what grief actually is, right? And to begin to build that relationship with it, inside and out. Because I always, like you said, I'm a student, right? I'm always a student. I'm constantly looking and going, what can I learn today? What's going on? Things like that. So when we think about grief, and I want to talk about a few different things. I want to find out what your thoughts is on the 5 pillars of grief, and how can that be beneficial in building a very intentional grieving pattern for yourself. So that would be my first one to you. And then once you get done with that, I'll ask another one for you.
So I am, for anyone who's listening, I am not a psychotherapist or a therapist, right? So when I approach grief, I approach it from a very holistic perspective, which is Ayurveda and yoga. And going through my own grief process, which is why I became a grief coach after I lost my dad and my father-in-law within 2 days, randomly, unexpectedly, of each other 2 years ago. Um, I realized there is no formula to healing.
Right, right.
And the stages, initially when this whole thing came about, it was for a specific group of cancer patients,
Mhm.
right? So I feel, and this is where Ayurveda comes in handy, depending on your imbalances, you might be stuck in anger phase versus denial phase. So that's where I found why it's unique to use the other aspect of Ayurveda and yoga, why some traits show up more in other people, or the grieving stages, as you call them. And I felt it's not linear. You could be doing great, and then 1 second, and bam, you could be back to where you started.
Mhm.
So these stages, I don't know. They are there. I don't know how beneficial they are, because yes, they help label and define this is where I'm at, but it doesn't help, Tony. If I'm stuck in anger phase, being told I'm in anger phase doesn't help me. If I'm in denial phase, you have to look within this is where the holistic practices come in handy, and ask yourself what, like you said, for you, solitude works. Stages don't matter. You know what you need. And you might have learned that through experimentation, which what I mean by that is, oh, I'm in a group of people. That doesn't feel authentic to me. I feel like I'm shutting down, or I'm feeling agitated, or I'm feeling depressed. Ayurveda will label all of those emotions. That's what came in handy, right? So the stages,
Yes.
I think it's great to know on paper, but grief doesn't have a order. I don't think it's linear, and it's messy. And I think once we accept, we will all grieve, whether we like it or not, period. And grief is messy. I think we can take those stages a little bit, at face value, instead of saying, oh, now it's time for anger, now it's time for denial, now it's time for this. It
Yeah,
doesn't work
yeah.
that way.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean, right? Because again, being in this industry now for 6 years,
Right.
one of, I was confused at first, right? And then, which is the reason why I asked what your thoughts were on it.
Right.
I was confused at first because I didn't like I understood the 5 stages, but I never followed that pattern. Like it's this, that, another. And what I ended up finding, this is why I converted it back over. I said, now I understand what they were for, although these are great things to recognize, but I began to separate them, right, and begin to add what I was actually feeling under those different categories,
Right.
and was able to build upon that, and became, once I realized what it was, I became very intentional about my grieving,
Mm.
right, very intentional. And what I mean by that, I began to understand, and I went, if I'm going to feel this, I need to feel it in its entirety, not just in bits and pieces. If it decides to switch on me, I want to understand where it switches and understand what this is. That way I can put it into a different category, right? Because it's not always going to be the same. And when I began to do that, just like you said, the messiness began to make sense to me, right?
Mm.
But I also cross-referenced it to who am I as a human being. Let's look at the in-depthness of that.
Right.
I'm full of nerves. I'm full of muscles. I have organs and things like that, right? I was born a human being. I said, okay, what does that entail for Tony? And I began to again personalize it. So again, thinking about things in the same way. That's it. I don't know. So everybody's different. Everybody's different.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I feel like, when we're looking at the stages, it's what denial, or anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I think
Mhm.
come the holiday season, if your grief is new, there is no acceptance. There is anger. Or there
Yes.
could be, you could go back into depression, or you're just bargaining. So what it key is knowing yourself. And also, I don't know, Tony, tell me what you think about this. I feel like grief reveals sides to ourselves which we didn't know existed,
Ooh.
right?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. You hit the nail on the head, and I think that's where a lot of people begin to back off of it, right? Because if you've never sat with yourself and went through a phase where you looked at yourself in the mirror and did not like yourself, like you couldn't stand the person that you was looking at, you never really truly met yourself.
Right.
Because when you're grieving, that's the only thing it's doing is mirroring all of those things that you've hidden. At some point, there's going to be an eruption that happens. If you don't love yourself, of course you don't want to go through the revealing part of it, because it's going to teach you humility, humbleness, grace, forgiveness, and accountability. Now, a few of those words people don't want to do. They don't want to be accountable for the things that they've done while they held on to this hurt and this trauma, right? So they use that part as an excuse. If I let go, then I'm gonna have to, no, I can't do that. I gotta always protect myself. That's survival mode,
Hmm.
right? And anytime you've gone through something traumatic, survival mode is another stage of grief that people don't really understand either. So it's associative. And so, once you even begin to find a place within yourself where you say, I want something better, it's whatever you do from that point on, it's going to keep circling back around until you become submissive to it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also, grief changes you forever. We will never be the same people. Because when you lose someone, this is assuming you're in a healthy relationship, you lose a part of yourself. And if you're in an unhealthy relationship with the person you've lost, the pain still exists. So it becomes more complicated. Like I've had people, tell me like, oh, I hated my mom. And this older gentleman, and he was like, I'm glad she's dead. And I said to him, I'm sure there's a reason you say what you say. And and he was like, oh, no one has said that to me. And I'm like, you're hurting, so you're saying what you're saying, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And so it's also, if you've had the privilege of having had healthy relationships with our deceased loved ones, it's a one different conversation. Grief is so much more nuanced, where you have these regrets, but you also have remorse, but then you also have anger. There's also resentment if you shared an unhealthy relationship. So when people say there should be a timeline, unless you've been through grief, you don't know what it's like. It depends
Right.
on the relationship you shared with the person, depends on what importance they held in your life.
I love that because um, I often educate myself on those exact meanings, right? As we begin to evolve and grow within this grief field, the depthness of it, again, as I said before, is far greater than anything else that I've ever imagined. And you're absolutely right. Depending on the relationship that people, individuals have, would affect the way that they grieve. And so people don't understand that. A lot of people don't really understand that. But slowly but surely, through conversations and education, people are starting to grab onto the concept of that. But I also want to talk about another side of that too, right? I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about someone who had just passed away,
Oh,
and they took it personally, right? They really took it personally. And so I started thinking about things, and I asked her, I said, "Did you know this individual personally?" She goes, "No, I just knew this person from television." I said, "So you really didn't know them?" I understand you trying to be empathetic. I said, "But while you're making this more personable, did you ever think about the other side? Did you ever think about the parents and that man's kids and his wife and everybody, all of his friends? Did you ever think about those people that knew him personally? And just looking at things from a different perspective." And I think that's when, with grief is designed, and I love that you said this. Grief is designed to make you look at life through different lenses, through a more honest lens.
right.
And in turn, it changes, it tells you certain truths about this life. And it's up to you whether or not you want to accept it.
Hmm.
So, part of the journey of grieving is getting to a place of understanding. I really struggle with the word acceptance in the grieving process. I really struggle with that. I like to say it's acknowledgement, because you acknowledge the world that you live in, right? You acknowledge the changes that have happened without these individuals in your world. And, and what does your life look like afterwards? And it opens up the doors for you to be either one or two ways: um, go into isolation, or explore what joy looks like after that with that sort of knowledge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, okay. So let's talk about, I want to talk about being trauma informed, because I know there's a lot of people who deal with unresolved trauma and not even know. And, and, and I say this because I am guilty of this as well. If I'm not aware of my triggers, when they come up, I have a self defense mechanism to where, it's designed to keep me safe.
Right.
And I will go back into a shell because naturally I'm an introvert, and I will go back to my shell and I won't let anybody else in. And here recently, had it happen 3 times, but I was so aware of it. But I had already put actions behind emotions in the same sense. Let's talk about when those things happen. Yeah, I mean, because I've always been curious, and I know there may be somebody out there right now that it's happening to, and subconsciously they're not even aware of it.
Absolutely. So, I work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. My trauma informed yoga classes are very often for them specifically. But speaking to trauma informed, so triggers could be people who are navigating trauma. It So let me rephrase this. A lot of people tell me, what trauma? I've had a great life.
Mhm.
What does great mean? And trauma doesn't necessarily mean there was violence or sexual trauma or sexual assault. Trauma could have been dysfunctional upbringing. Trauma could have been something that happened in school or at work. At some stage of life, I know I've had that, working for a manager who just my the nerve in my neck would get pulled out of stress. Like, I kid you not. It was the stress level that was trauma. So I'm not minimizing trauma around sexual assault or domestic violence, but trauma is when you feel like you're overreacting to things. Like, I loved what you said, actions before behind your emotions were already in place, but healing is happening when you paused and you reflected on it. So next time there's a trigger, oh, that's coming. I need to either move myself from the situation or find a support person or do XYZ. So when people, women, and this really bothers me, are often told, don't be so dramatic, react. If you haven't been given the space to express yourself, that is also trauma. When you think about it, like, when we don't hold space for women to express their stories, they talk about their lives, talk about their problems, it's often diminished, it's minimized. What happens? They shut down. And one day, if someone really starts to talk about, and this is them expressing the trauma, it might sound explosive, but that is because their trauma has been, keep quiet, don't be dramatic, don't be so emotional. There are already these labels and adjectives. You're an emotional woman, don't brew up drama. That is also a form of trauma. So while someone might shut down, someone might be extremely reactive. For some people, and very often this happens with people who are navigating trauma, the nervous system is dysregulated. So they might be hyper sensitive to environments, to sounds, to people. Like, I could just close the door, and a person who's navigating trauma might be just hypersensitive to just that sound, right? Or they might be hypersensitive to a conversation. Not everyone is ill-intentioned, right? Sometimes people just say something. And when you're navigating trauma, you might personalize it or see that as a personal attack. And then pay attention to conversations. How are you showing up to them, to life? Would we all have those moments, which I was sharing with you earlier today, where you say, for me, it's summer because it's so stimulating. I also need those pockets of missing out on things and just turning inward. But if just not wanting to connect with others constantly on a regular basis could be also an expression of trauma, right? Where you don't feel safe expanding your circle outside of you. And then sleep is another big issue. A lot of trauma survivors, because when you sleep, you feel vulnerable because you're not alert and awake and paying attention to the environment around you. So when you feel not your like your usual self, whatever your usual self would be, everyone has a different benchmark. It might be time to talk to a mental health professional, a health professional, an Ayurvedic doctor, depending on the modality that speaks to you, or maybe even investigating and exploring what are the different modalities out there. Because not feeling safe in your own body is not easy. And that's what trauma does to people. If you can't feel safe within you, if you're disconnected from your own self, how will you connect with anybody outside? And what I learned from the trauma-informed yoga practice is the language that we use. Yes. The number of times people are told, calm down. Oh my God, if someone could calm down, they would calm down. Like, it's just, and it's not that the person is being rude. That's the world we live in. We tell people, oh, relax, oh, calm down. Someone who's been sexually assaulted oftentimes has been told by the perpetrator, if you relax, if you calm down, I won't hurt you. So when you use language like that, you are triggering their trauma, right? So it's being really mindful of how we
Yeah.
show up to conversations is very important. And on the other hand, for someone who, who's wondering if there is a trauma that I can't remember, there's intergenerational trauma that we carry. There's in utero trauma. If the biological mom was navigating certain issues and was pregnant at the time, the embryo, the baby who's now an adult, has carried that trauma with them. There is science. This is not me just talking. This is saying this, like, there is proof of intergenerational trauma, of interutero trauma. So trauma is so nuanced, and working on your healing should be highest priority. And you don't have to do it alone. Like I said earlier, find the person who works as a good fit for you, but getting that help is essential, because otherwise we pour our trauma into our spaces, into our being, into our relationships, into our families, and then we create another generation of dysfunction if we don't take care of our own trauma.
Right. Man, I love that, because that gives another way for people to look at these things too. And the reason why I say that is because back when I used to think karma was coming and beating up on me, and it wouldn't release me for years and years and years. And I always felt like maybe I'm paying for somebody else's stuff. I was like, I didn't even do nothing this time. Why is this happening to me? Right. And I've always used to feel that way. Like, what did I do to deserve this? I did research, right? And I started diving deeper into ancestral traumas,
Mm.
right? So the depthness of that, because I I knew a little bit about generational traumas. I knew a little bit about community traumas, shared traumas, right? Habitual, all of these different things. But then the question was, where did all of this stem from? If I feel like this, I'm not the only one. And what I found is that and we carry the traumas of our ancestors,
Yes.
and you never really understand of how much it affects you in your day-to-day present life, right? Um,
Absolutely.
let's talk about that a little bit, because if we understand what our ancestors are going through, I guess my question would be, once we begin to pinpoint um, who we who we're carrying this trauma from, do we develop a different sort of relationship with our ancestors on a different understanding of releasing the traumas in order to begin to live a healthier life in this world? Because we think about all the other things that we do, right?
So I think the one thing, as I get wiser with age, I've realized every parent, every grandparent does the best that they can. Their best might not be our best. Their best might not be what you need, but they try to. There are, unfortunately, people who are violent and sexually abused. I'm not talking about them. The
Mhm.
other half, or the three quarters, I would like to believe at least, who are dysfunctionally still functioning, are still trying to do the best. So I think forgiveness releases you of any pain. You don't forgive people for them, you forgive them for you. It's a cliche, but they say, when you're angry, it's like holding hot coal in your hand and expecting the other person's hands to get burned. So isn't that so? I want to really believe, because I want to believe if the world is such a difficult and dark place, I want to believe in the goodness. So I want to believe ancestors carried their trauma because the world was different. Where you come from, the trauma of your ancestors are different from the trauma of my ancestors.
Right, right.
But they've all had their traumas, whether it's a partition, or it's slavery, or be it anything, right? Whether it's racism or religion, or all of those issues. And I explain this to even my colleagues and friends. I am not going to sit and apologize for something that a generation, two generation, three generations above me did, because I don't even know their reasons. I don't want to believe everyone is barbaric.
Mhm.
It's unfortunate if they did something that they did. It is I will not justify bad behavior. But what I can do is I make sure I don't continue that forward.
Mm, I love that.
Right? So it's in, why should I be carrying the baggage of something apparently if they did wrong? I don't know their story. Textbooks are one-sided, stories are one-sided. Get people in the room with both sides of the story, I want to know. Right? So I'm like, I'm not justifying anything wrong that's ever done in the world. All I'm saying is I cannot carry that burden.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I will choose to do all the work to be a better person. I will choose all the work to do to realize I'm carrying this. We say, oh, I get this from my mom, I get this from my dad, the good qualities. I also acknowledge the challenging qualities I get from both or from my grandparents. So I work on releasing that. Right? So when I release that, I forgive them automatically.
I love that. I love your mindset on that, because that automatic let go, it's like you've already analyzed everything. You saw where value was and where it wasn't, and made the better choice. I love that, because that's something that I also preach to people as well. Like, you do have a choice whether or not how you want to carry this. And I'm right there with you. I was just curious because um the way that it always made me feel, the curiosity behind it, the questions that came behind it, like, is this really affecting what I'm doing now? Right. And I don't think it's a matter of pointing the finger at anyone, but understanding how it's affecting your day-to-day life. Right. Because if you think about the spirituality of grief, it's it's vast. It's very, very vast.
Right.
And the understanding, I think that's where we both understand the fact that, the depthness of the understanding of it. Like, it can take you down so many different avenues, but it's picking up and understanding that you can make a choice from this point on once you become aware of what's going on with you, and things like that, and being courageous enough to not to grieve unapologetically, right? To look at it and go, this doesn't even have anything to do with me, and go, no, this doesn't affect me like that. I get to make the choice of how I get to live my life. What I find with sometimes clients, they don't realize that they have that option, and so they become stuck in that cycle. That becomes very, very, very dangerous at times.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I have learned to, maybe 5 years ago, I would have, if you'd asked me that question, I would have given you a different response. But like I said, having lost both my parents, every day is about a choice.
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm realizing life is about choices. On any given day, there'll be two or multiple paths offered. Which path are you choosing? Is that one of least resistance? Is that one of growth? And there are no right or wrong answers. And that's what I think we need to really own our own BS as well. And that comes from anchoring ourselves. When we feel stuck, and I still feel stuck, don't get me wrong, like, but then when I add a little distance and I'll look at why am I feeling stuck? Yes, some situations are really terrible.
Mhm.
But what can I do? Now, this is the situation. I can spend my energy fighting it or
Mhm.
find a resolution around it so that I'm ready, because nothing in this world is constant, Tony. Everything is temporary.
Yeah.
So it's and that's why I'm like such a big believer in yoga, mindfulness, meditation, because have practices that ground you. Everything is not happening to you, it's happening in the world around you. And at the same time, I'm not of that expression either, where yes, things happen for a reason, but death, don't tell people it happens for a reason. If they figure that out in their own time, when someone has lost a loved one, don't be preachy about that. Let them figure out what this message is, what are they learning from that experience. But for the griever, it is up to them. It's a choice. You
Yes.
choose to resort to different modalities of healing. Either you can do yoga or you can find a wine bottle. Either you can find substance abuse or you can find community work. It's going to be hard work, needless to say. Grief is just hard work. And you have to take ownership of you can help your clients as much as you want. I can help them. But if they don't do the work, nothing, the needle won't move.
That's
And
true.
that desire has to come from within. So when we say this, we feel this stagnation or stuckness, that's grief. Grief is heavy. Grief has the sticky quality. You have to do the work to let the light enter in. You can't be in the same position, keep the same diet and lifestyle habits, not change your mindset and expect things to change. No one can do that for you. We can be there as guides and allies, but the desire has to come from within. And this is where I tell people what a privilege it is to be alive. No matter how we lose a loved one, right? Like, I'm not talking about whether they chose to take their life or something went wrong or it was not timely, untimely, whatever be it, they are gone. So just know what a privilege it is to be alive. And do you want to really waste that life that so many others would give whatever to be in your place?
I love that. Very well spoken. Very well spoken. I want to piggyback off of that because as you was talking about that, I was thinking part of the journey. I've been honored and privileged enough to host a few death cafes, and just what you were talking about, that helping people live a more infinite life, full of adventure. Part of that journey is opening up the doors to have to normalize these conversations, to
Right.
see where your fears are. But the other side of it is to say, if you had the opportunity to plan your transition, to design what your funeral looked like, what would it look like? And we make those dreams come true. Do that because now we open up the doors for to normalize. You know what I'm saying, that this is hey, these things are going to happen,
Right. Oh, I love
right? And coming up with a plan, because the last thing that we want your family to do is argue about who gets the earrings or argue about who gets the dress and the shoes, who gets the pictures. Because you're gone, you're not there to let them know who you would like these things to go through. So let's eliminate that. Let's write it down. That way, when you transition, they never have to question this. It eliminates a whole lot of family arguments,
right.
right? And then once we do that, we go, now that we have this out the way, you don't have to worry about this. Let's talk about, have you ever been parachuting? What are some of the things that you would like to do? So you take the worry out of that and you bring a place in where people can begin to get out of a place of being stuck and uncertain to really looking at life and filling in those uncertainties with spontaneous joy, laughter,
Right.
right? And so same thing what you were saying. It's same exact thing. Getting people out of a place of being stuck, understanding that we still have joy in this world after an extreme loss. And sometimes people just need a plan. So,
They do. And sometimes people feel guilty. Like,
mm,
is it okay for me to feel the joy I've lost? So they don't have to be equated. Just because you've suffered pain doesn't mean you don't deserve happiness
this
or
is true.
healing.
This
And
is true.
so sometimes the stuckness or that stagnation comes from that inner conflict. And that's why it's important to seek out help, because we don't need to know the answers. I mean, if we could all do everything by ourselves, kids won't go to school, right? There's a reason. There's someone teaching you English, there's someone teaching you calculus, there's someone teaching you physics. Like, there's a whole point to the system. And that's what it is. Like, don't try to find answers on your own. Get that help.
Yeah.
Because again, sometimes you notice this with people, like, I was so sure of myself, and then I said, but the grief is something so new, and you were sure of everything you've known so far. But
Mhm.
grief can hit you like this, and then you're no longer the same person. So why are you taking on that added pressure of grieving? And then you're also grieving your identity. When you lose a loved one, part of your identity also changes with them, right?
Mhm.
So get that help. Can't encourage people enough to do that. Speak to people. And sometimes it's nicer to talk to folks who don't know you, which is like the work that you do, coming to your groups or talking to a mental health professional or a grief coach or an Ayurvedic doctor, because it's unbiased.
Yeah.
We have nothing, we are only vested in the good well-being and the health and the healing. There's no bias in that, and it's a safe space.
Yeah.
Because the other thing, Tony, is with grief, you also realize there's so many layers to your personality. When life is going your way, you don't need to focus on this. Very few people would turn inward to peel out layers of the onion within their personality. But
Yeah.
when grief hits, all of a sudden, oh man, I could feel that. Oh, I can say that. Oh, I could survive this. Oh, I couldn't manage this. So having the safe, unbiased people in your tribe is key to healing.
Yes. This is very true. I love that. I want to talk about something that most people don't talk about these days. It's an addiction that goes unnoticed with those in the grief field. And I want to talk about grief addiction,
Hmm.
you know. And what I mean by that, most people will come in and go, oh, well, grief addiction is this, that, another, and everybody put their little spin on it of, oh, grief addiction can affect. No, I want to talk about the depthness of what grief addiction actually looks like so other people can be aware of this. So, what I understand, and you can fact check me and things like that, and I could be wrong, but grief addiction is defined as someone who hasn't let go of their own grief, and in turn brings on other people's grief to personalize it as their own because they're addicted to the emotion and the attention that they get from it.
Right. Yeah. It's I'll share an example with you. My mom would tell me this story, and I write about it in my book, The Loss That Binds Us. Is she knew a woman who, after her father passed away, turned her living room into a museum. They lived in the same building. Museum, what I mean by that is his shoes, his things that he would use, like a handkerchief or whatever, was all on display in the living room. See, to me, that is also grief addiction. We over romanticizing the dead is also grief addiction, right? So it's not wanting to get out of that space, taking on other people's stuff. But if you create your environment to be conducive to this situation, which is unhealthy, it works as nourishment for grief addiction. And I believe, and a therapist could speak more to this than I could, I feel that there has to be a mental health issue.
I do too.
From an Ayurvedic perspective, I know what imbalance that is. But from a psychiatry perspective, this is not normal. People have complicated grief. People have delayed grief. People have anticipatory grief. They're different kinds. When my father passed away and my father-in-law, we came back. I was still getting a doctorate in Ayurveda. So I had to do that. There was school, there was work, there was the company, all of that. And for 3 months, we had guests visiting us. I mean, lovely of them, condolence visitors. So I didn't have space to really grieve until one day I said enough. And that was delayed grief, right? So there are different kinds of grief. One gets that. But to be in that grief addiction mode, I think you need serious help to get out of that funk. Because for some people, that's the place they thrive. That pain is how they know how to exist. It's almost like you take away that pain, then who am I? You take away that grief, who am I?
Right.
It's like living in reality that denial is their armor. So maybe they haven't gotten past that denial phase of grief if we're looking at the 5 stages. Because you
Right.
get them out of it and you realize, like for instance, in my case, both my parents are gone. Now what? My roof and foundation are gone. Now what? And so something like that could get people really hooked into that place that they are, because that feels safe and familiar. Pain is familiar to a lot of people, unfortunately.
Can we flip it around a little bit? Because I totally agree. And as you was talking about that, I was going, what if it's a trauma response, right? And so if we look at it like a trauma response, this is like somebody who has been abandoned, who has been abused before. And, their inner child is still seeking that validation, that attention. So maybe they're just adopting that because they're watching the people who are actively grieving, being personally affected by it, and they're going, I want to feel that too. Now, that could be pretty dangerous because that means that individual is walking around numb 98% of the time. So they're actively seeking out these areas to where they can go and feel wanted or even feel needed. Because although grief addiction, carries those other traits, these people can be the ones that are bringing the food to your house, sitting there talking with you, right? But it becomes dangerous because then they take on that emotion, and they take away from the people. Instead of being mindful and holding the space with them, they're actively sharing that emotional space with them,
Oh, you said that so beautifully, because that
right?
that intimacy is dangerous, where they share
Yes.
the emotional space. That is, but there are also people, if you realize, who thrive on the negative. So
Mhm.
these are all traumas. These are mental health issues. It's very layered. It's not just one thing, right?
Right,
Every
right,
individual's journey would. There are people who can relate to you if you're going through a bad time, because that's where they thrive. It's not that they just want the bad to happen to you. No, no, no. They just know how to thrive during bad times, or that bad energy conversation thing when things are not going. It's scary for them to say, oh, something actually worked out. So when things don't work out for you, it's not that they're happy for you, they're happy for themselves. So what you just talked about, grief addiction. So it's so nuanced. It is a trauma response, but it could also be, who knows whose backstory is.
right, right. And I think that's where the education comes in, and
Right.
more education needs to be explored when it comes to that. So we as practitioners can notice when these things are happening. And I think that's just a new way, another door, another avenue for us to go in and explore, add those tools to our tool belt to make us even better at what we do. We do have a couple comments on Instagram. I want to read a couple of them out real quick. And this comes from my friend Shy. And the first comment is, when we're talking about people who are actively in grief addiction, she says that she has empathy for people like that, and she speaks from her own experiences, and understanding what they feel because themselves have been there. And they also say they come to a phase that other people and other individuals have their own way of grieving.
Mm.
So, thank you, Shai.
Yeah, thank you so
What are
much.
your thoughts on those?
Like I'll, my approach to grief is also very customized. We need to know people's backstories. Like, Shai mentioned, like, if you know someone, I haven't met some, like, I just know of this woman who my mother talked about the grief addiction. I have personally never seen that in my clients. Most of my clients, when they come to me, are trying to navigate. Their grief is really fresh, and they want an alternate route to therapy, where they're like, okay, what can I do more with my diet and lifestyle, so I can get motivated to take care of myself. So that's not been my experience. But I would say, I would always feel for anyone who's in pain, right? It's a difficult position to be in pain, and then to identify with someone else's pain. That can't be easy.
That's what I was thinking too. But again, this is just a theory that's out there, and I know there's been cases of that, and so it's always a curiosity of, especially being a student of everything, right? It's always a curiosity of what does that look like? What's the depthness of what it entails, and also the behavioral aspects of it, right? So we can become more aware of when
Absolutely.
someone is actually doing that, like, so it's something fun to explore. It really is something fun
And
to
it
explore.
helps others. It helps. Ultimately, as healers, we want to just help others.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's why the conversations around intergenerational, ancestral, in utero trauma is so necessary, because some people might assume that they come from thriving functional families. But then
right,
why do I have this trauma? They might not realize it's ancestral, it's intergenerational, it's in utero.
right.
Everything is not happening in the now, it has also happened, and it's been transmuted to the embryo. So having awareness of that also helps us navigate grief challenges that we might see in our clients.
Mhm. Yes, yes. So you got tell people where they can find your books. You are a 14-time author. Where
Yeah.
can people find all of your books at?
Amazon would be the easiest. You can see my first name and my last name on the screen. That's where you'll find me. Those are my social media handles, and my books are on Amazon. Or you could go to my website where you'll find all of the information, how to book a discovery call. I also wanted to let your guests know, Tony, that, when we grieve, our sleep is one of the first things to get impacted, right? And I have a freebie, which I'll email it to you. And if you wanted to share, or please go to my website. It's at shwetavikram.com, and I'll send it to Tony as well. It's a free sleep guide. You just enter your email, and it's Ayurvedic tips to navigate your sleep. Nothing medicinal. It's not an alternative for therapy. It's complementary. Simple daily ritual, because my practice is about empowering people. So simple daily rituals that can help you enjoy a good night's sleep. And I know from my own experience, sleep and appetite, they're the first two things to go.
That's very true.
So yeah, just go to my website and you'll find it at the top.
Okay. I appreciate that. And for everybody, her information is in the YouTube channel. So you guys can go there and check it out. Go to her website. And on your website, you got a list of all your books on Amazon as well?
Everything. How people can work with me, the books, everything.
Okay. Most definitely. So guys, go there and check her out, and let her know that you saw on the podcast, man. You know what I'm saying? Go get those little freebies, but also take time to connect, right? And, and dive deeper into what Sweta got going on. You know what I'm saying? I think there's going to be an awesome connection to be made there. So now my next question would be, how can people find you?
Easiest is my website. So it's my first name, last name, .com, or Instagram. I'm very active on there. Connect with me on Instagram. A great way.
All right.
Yeah.
And so my next question is, what would it be?
Sorry, you froze for a second, Tony. Could you repeat that?
I was saying, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
If I could just make people feel safe in who they are. I see that a lot. And what I mean by that is not necessarily speaking from a trauma response angle. I work with kids who are in college to all the way with senior citizens, right? And very often we just don't feel safe in who we are. I'm not saying in our families or with our bodies, just in who we are. So if I could just help people, feel safe, that would also make them feel visible and like that they mattered. So we start to navigate the world through a different lens then. Two parts of the sympathetic, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, right? When it's sympathetic, which is great because it helps us say, oh, danger, let's avoid that, lights, don't walk, a car might hit you. And parasympathetic, it's safe. We spend most of our time in sympathetic nervous system now because we don't feel safe. So it's like, oh, danger. Autoimmunes are happening. People's digestion is going crazy. People don't sleep well. So when we start to feel safe in who we are, we navigate from the parasympathetic nervous system, where you still know when to stop and pause and protect yourself, but you don't assume that the world is a dangerous place. So that would be my superpower, how I would like to help people.
I love that. One last question for you before I let you go. If you could leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
You are brilliant and beautiful the way you are. And every time you feel disconnected with the world, disappointed, simple trip. Bring one hand to your heart, one hand to your belly, and just breathe deeply. This will bring you into your parasympathetic nervous system. And when you do this, everything changes because instead of being reactive, we start to respond. So simple, one hand, doesn't matter which, on your heart, one hand on your belly. And touch makes a huge difference to our nervous system. It helps you feel safe. So this is something I'd leave you with. Before a presentation, do this. Family conflict, do this. Arguing with your partner, children not listening to you, you grieving, any of that. And I say this because I've done this. I've sat next to my father who was on his deathbed, and I've done this to make sure I was anchored. Because if once we are anchored, we can navigate anything in this world.
Love that. I love that. All right. I love this conversation. We have to do this again.
I would absolutely love that. Thank you for having me on this
Of course.
podcast interview, Tony. And thank you to everyone who's joined, who's left comments, who's tuned in. You know where to find me. Please connect with us. Um, the more we talk about grief, we take away the shame and taboo and the isolation that grief brings.
Love that. For everybody, man, if you haven't already, do me a favor, head on over to their YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop the episode. And most importantly, just always remember, everybody that I talk to on the show, there are people who are actively in this field and they're here to help you. Like I said, they're changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. You guys already know what you're getting yourself into. So, we're making it easy for you guys to find that support. Other thing is a huge update. I'm keep bringing an update until it's launched. So big shout out to my man Q. We got a new program coming out called Connect Work. It's going to be on YouTube. You guys will be able to tune in for that every Tuesdays and Thursdays when it launch and everything, which we're going to put all the information out there when it goes. I'm up there with my man Q, Quay, and IKS, and we're going to be having a great time, you guys. So, I'll keep you guys informed of how that goes. With everything else, you guys already know the 5th of each month, I got the magazine. I also got the graphic novel coming out as well, so you guys get to enjoy those and stay informed in that way as well. Sweta, thank you again for being on the show. Love to have you up here again. We can talk about anything that you want to and everything. Everybody, again, go check her out. Show that support and take a look at some of her books, man. You know what I'm saying? As you guys already know, we're dropping gems. We're helping people heal. We're helping people move. And as with that being said, we're closing out this episode of Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys already know we do one every day. So tune in tomorrow for another exciting episode. Until that time, you guys already should be out there making memories with the people that you love because tomorrow's not promised. I love you. And guys, as always, thank you for your support.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.